Good evening. Am I audible to everyone? Sivakumar, good evening. Yes, Shravani, good evening. Am I audible to everyone? Please respond. Lucky, good evening. Sainath, good evening. Guru, good evening. Yes, Ganesh, good evening. Kausalya, good evening. Am I audible to everyone? Swati, good evening. Yes, Pujita, Vamsi, good evening. Yes, what we discussed yesterday? Quickly, can you have a quick recap of what we discussed yesterday? Please respond. What we discussed yesterday? Please respond. What we discussed yesterday? Yes, good evening everybody. Priya, good evening. Sasi, good evening. Sunil Kumar, good evening. Yes, Johnny, good evening. Yeah. What we discussed yesterday? Escape sequence, concatenation of strings. So what are the different types of string functions I discussed with you yesterday? Yes, good evening everybody. What are all the different types of string functions I discussed with you yesterday? Yes, yesterday I was discussing with you about string functions, right? What are all the different types of string functions I was discussing with you yesterday? len function. What is the use of find function? I was discussing with you about find function, right? Yes, good evening everybody. Sujana, good evening. Mohammed, good evening. Sasi, good evening. Sumitra, good evening. Nazir, Pawan, good evening. Yes, Vishnu, good evening. Manasa, good evening. Durga, good evening. Satya, good evening. Yes, len function, find function, replace function. Yes. So what is the use of find function? Upper function, lowercase function. Yes. What is the use of find function? Please respond. What is the use of find function? What is the use of find function? Please respond. Yes, what is the use of find function? Find the index. Yes. What is the use of upper function, lowercase function, and what are the other things I discussed with you yesterday? Yeah, Kalyan, good evening. Good evening everybody. What are the other things I discussed with you yesterday? Yes, everything is clear whatever we saw yesterday? Yes. So what is the use of user-defined functions? Yesterday I just talked with user-defined function. What is the use of user-defined function? Please respond. Yeah, Kumar, good evening. Yes, good evening everybody. What is the use of, yesterday I just stopped with what we saw yesterday. What is the use of user-defined functions? Yesterday I was discussing with you about user-defined functions. Yes. To find the location, yes, whatever we saw yesterday, everything is clear. Whatever I discussed with you yesterday, everything is clear. Yes? Yes. So today I am going to discuss with you about classes and objects. So far I was discussing, I just gave an introduction to Python language. So what do you mean by operators, data types? So what are the different types of operators, data types available in Python? So I just gave what are the different applications of Python. Today I am going to continue. So what do you mean by classes and objects? So I am going to discuss with you about some advanced Python topics. What do you mean by classes and objects? So as I told you, right, Python is an object-oriented programming language. So we have different types of high-level programming languages. Basically, we have two different types of programming languages. One is called as a high-level programming language and one more is called as a low-level programming language. So what are all the different types of, you can go for Python language, C, C++, Perl, Java. So all this comes under high-level programming languages. So what are all the different features of Python? So today I am going to discuss with you about some of the object-oriented concept. So what do you mean by a class? So it is a user-defined prototype. For example, it contains a set of attributes that characterize any object of the class. So what do you mean by a class? Basically it is nothing but an outline, a template, a blueprint. So from which many instances can be created. They are called as objects. So the attributes, so as I was telling you, right, it is a user-defined prototype, a blueprint or a prototype, whatever you can call. For example, I can create a class called student class, or I can create a class called employee class. So it is a user-defined prototype for an object that defines a set of attributes that characterize any object of the class. So what do you mean by this? So the attributes, so each and every class, it is nothing but a prototype or a blueprint, an outline or a sketch. So the attributes are the data members and methods accessed via dot notation. Clear with this? So it contains a set of attributes. They are data members and methods. The attributes are nothing but the data members and methods accessed via dot notation. So each and every class, so the instances of the class are called as objects. So this is one important concept. So we can do many things with classes and objects. So as when we are going to develop some bigger applications, so it has got a potential impact. So what is mean by a class and what do you mean by an object? The attributes are nothing but the data members and methods. They are accessed via the dot notation. So what are all the important terms you should understand? So whenever I am going to discuss with you about classes and objects, so what are all the important terms you should understand? So you should understand basically what do you mean by a class variable, what do you mean by a data member, clear? So whenever I am going to discuss with you about classes and objects, you should understand. So what do you mean by a class variable? For example, as I told you, right, so whenever I am creating some student class, you should have some variables. The variables, I was discussing some basics, that is the basics fundamentals of Python. So variables are nothing but containers. They are used to store some values. So variable is shared by all the instances of the class. Clear with this? So for example, whenever I want to store the name of the student, so whenever I am going to create any student class, it is nothing but a template or a prototype, whatever you can call. So what are the different attributes it contains? A student can have a name or a department, which department he belongs to. So all these are called as variables. They are shared by all the instances of the class. So I am just creating a class called student, so you can create many objects or instances of that type. So you can create student 1, student 2, student 3. So class variables are defined within the class outside any of class methods. So they are called as class variables, a variable that is shared by all the instances of the class. So this is the important term you should understand. So what do you mean by a class variable? I was discussing with you about different types of variables. What do you mean by a local variables or global variables? So whenever I am talking about class variables or instance variables, so they are defined within the class. They are shared by all the instances of the class. And what do you mean by a data member? So data member is nothing but it holds the data associated with the class and its object, an instance variable. So whenever I am going to call any attributes, it can have data member and methods. So the behavior is described by the method. So this is one important OOPS concept, classes and objects. So next, so once you have created a class, so as I was telling you, right, so what do you mean by a class? So whenever I'm developing some website for a corporate company, so you can have an employee class. So all the employee details will be enclosed inside this class. So next, what are all the other things? So you have defined some class and it is going to have some instances, objects. Many instances or objects of that type can be created. So once you have created a class and objects, you can do different things. What do you mean by function overloading? Inheritance, instance variable, instance. So what do you mean by function overloading? Overload. So what do you mean by the term overload? Anybody can tell me? Yes, I will go a bit slower. So what do you mean by overloading? Topics I am not able to cover, so whatever I can cover, I will just cover. In between, if I have some time, yesterday's topics I will just continue. Today's topic is classes and objects. So what do you mean by an instance, that is overloading? So overloading is nothing but providing some excess functionality, additional functionality to the same function or method. So assignment of more than one behavior to a particular function. So it is called as function overloading. Clear? So what do you mean by function overloading? So assignment of more than one behavior to a particular function. So it is called as function overloading. Providing some excess functionality, burdened with some additional functionality. For example, I am having a function called average function, or you can call some other type of function. Yesterday I was discussing with you about user-defined functions. So what are the different types of user-defined functions? So what do you mean by function overloading? So overloading something, for example, I am doing some work here. So I am overloaded to do some other work at my house. So this concept is called as overloading concept, the assignment of more than one behavior to a particular function. So this is what is called as function overloading. Clear with this? So for example, I am having some average method or addition method. So I want to provide some excess functionality, additional functionality to the same function. So whenever I am going to call some add method, it is used to add two integer numbers. So whenever I am going to pass some integer values, whole number values, it will add two integer numbers. Or whenever I am going to pass some floating point values, so it will add some floating point numbers, decimal point numbers. This is what is called as function overloading. Clear with this? So what do you mean by overloading functionality? So I am just discussing some basic OOPS concept. What do you mean by object oriented? So when I am going to discuss some examples, you will just understand this better. What do you mean by object oriented? And inheritance. So what do you mean by this inheritance concept? So whenever the child class, it inherits the properties of the parent class, this concept is called as inheritance. So I am going to have a base class or a parent class. So it contains some attributes and methods. Whenever the child class, it inherits the properties of the base class or the parent class. This concept is called as inheritance concept. So the transfer of the characteristics of the class to other classes. So whichever class that are deriving, that is inheriting the parent class, it can access the parent class members and functions. Clear with this? So what do you mean by, so whenever I am going to discuss with you about object oriented, so you should understand all these terms. So what do you mean by overloading operation? What do you mean by inheritance? Clear with this? So the instantiation is nothing but creating an instance of the class. So class variables are called as instance variables. And method, a method is nothing but a kind of function that is defined inside the class. So an object is nothing but instance of the class. So whenever I have created some class, a class is nothing but a template, an outline from which many instances of that class can be created. They are called as objects. understand. So what do you mean by instantiating something? Instance variables are nothing but class variables. They are defined inside the class, outside any method body. They are called as instance variables. So I have a method. So you should understand. So whenever I have any instance of the class, so it contains some attributes and methods. So similar to function overloading, so we have operator overloading. What do you mean by this operator overloading? The assignment of more than one function to a particular operator. Similar to function overloading. So for example, I want to add I'm passing some vector. So operator overloading, providing some excess functionality to the same operator. I have plus operator, so I want to add 2 integers or I want to add 2 strings. So overloading is nothing but providing some, that is overloading operation, providing some excess functionality to the same method or operator. Clear with this? So I just gave an introduction to classes and objects. So what do you mean by a class variable? What do you mean by a data member? Function overloading. So all these are the important terms you should understand. So whenever I am going to discuss with you about object oriented. So Python is an object, it supports a variety of features. So far I just gave an introduction to Python. So it supports a variety of features, function overloading. So you can provide more than one behavior to a particular function. Instance variable, inheritance. Clear with this? So for example, I am going to clear with the concept. So you should understand basically what do you mean by a class and what do you mean by an object. For example, so this is how a class looks like. Whenever I want to create any new class, I have to use the class keyword followed by the name of the class name, colon, followed by the statement block. So whatever I want to write inside this class, it contains the class members, attributes and then functions. So this is what is called as object oriented. So I am just giving a basic syntax of this. Clear? So I will just explain a simple example of this, what I am trying to do here. So whenever I want to create any new class, I have to use the class keyword followed by the name of the class. I am creating a class called student class, colon. So this is the syntax for creating a class. And inside this class, I am just initializing this variable, student count equal to 0. So firstly, I am just initializing a variable called student count equal to 0. And inside this, I am defining a user defined function. I am just initializing this. So self, comma, name, comma, age. So all these are the data members. As I was telling you, right, so whenever I am going to talk with you about classes and objects, it contains attributes, that is data members and methods. So I am just initializing this. Self.name equal to name, self.age equal to age, and student.student count equal to plus equal to 1. So I am just incrementing the student count by 1. I am just initializing, this is an init method. So whenever I am going to call this method, so I am just initializing. So what is the name of the student? What is the age of the student? And I am incrementing the student count by 1. And then I am defining a user defined function called display count. Whenever I want to define any user defined function, I have to use the def keyword followed by the name of the function. So I am just defining a user defined function called display count. So total student, so percentage D. Yesterday I was discussing with you about different type of format specifiers. So whenever I want to display them in integer format, so I have to go for this percentage small d. So percentage of student dot student count. So it is going to display the student count. So I am defining one more user defined function called display student. So whenever I am going to call this user defined function, it is going to display the name and the age of the student. Clear with this? So as I was telling you, right, so instance variables, whenever I am creating some variables inside a class, so it can be accessed from anywhere within the entire program. So for example, next I am trying to create the object of the student class. So student of, I am just initializing the name and the age of the student. It is stored in the variable student1. So again I am just calling the student class. Again I am passing the name and the age of the student. So it is stored in the variable student1 and then student2. And student1 dot, I am just calling a user defined function called display student. Clear with this? So student2 dot display student. So I am going to display the student name and age and the total number of students. Clear with this? So this is an example, simple example of classes and objects. So whenever I am trying to create some prototype, so as I was telling you, it is the important technical term you should understand. A class is nothing but a prototype or a blueprint or an outline. So I am just creating a class called student class, and many instances of that type can be created. They are called as objects. So student 1, student 2. So each and every student, he is going to have a unique name and an age. So I will just show you a simple example of this. So I will just show you a simple example of this. So I have to give the corresponding syntax and then I am clicking the run button. Clear with this example? So whenever I want to create any new class, I am using the class keyword followed by the name of the class. So I am just creating a class called student class colon and I am instantiating this variable student count equal to 0. And then I am defining, I am just initializing this self, name and then age. So self dot name equal to name. So I am just initializing the name, age and then I am incrementing. So each and every time I am initializing the name and age. So I have to increment the student count by 1. Clear with this? So I am defining separate user defined function called display count and then display student. So it is going to display the total student count and the name and the age of the student. Clear? So this is a simple example. Similarly, if I want to create an employee class, so I can just create so. So you can see here using the class name, so I am just initializing. So whenever I am going to call this, so whenever I am trying to create an instance, so I am going to initialize the name and the age of the student. Self dot name equal to name and self dot age equal to age. Clear? So I am trying to create two variables, student 1 and then student 2. Clear with this? So each and every time I am going to initialize the name and the age of the student, I am trying to increment the student count by 1. Till this part, what everything is clear. So classes and objects, this is one important concept in Python. Till this part, whatever I am speaking, everything is clear. So student count is a class variable. So what do you mean by an instance variable or a class variable? It is shared among all the instances of the class. So I am trying to create many objects of the class type. It can be shared among all the instances of the class. So it is called as a class variable or an instance variable. Clear with this? So this is one important concept, classes and objects. So you have different methods. So instead of using normal statements to access the attributes, so I can use some following functions. There are some inbuilt functions. So yesterday I was discussing with you about predefined function and user-defined function. What do you mean by a predefined function and what do you mean by a user-defined function? So you can go here, get attribute, has attribute, set attribute. So all these are the different attributes, that is accessing attributes. For example, if I want to access the attribute of an object, I can go for this get attribute function. And has attribute, if I want to check if an attribute exists or not, so I can go for this has attribute. And set attribute is used to set an attribute. So if the attribute does not exist, then it would be created. And delete attribute, it is used to delete an attribute. Clear with this? So accessing attributes. So all these are the different types of operations. So once I have created classes and objects, you can do all these operations. Clear with this? Say for example, I am just calling the display count function. And then I am initializing the age of the student. Student1.age equal to 7. So student1.age equal to 8. Clear with this? And then I am checking. So has attribute, it returns true if the age attribute exists. Till this part, whatever I am speaking, everything is clear. Next I am going to discuss with you about class inheritance. Till this part, whatever I am speaking, everything is clear. If you are interested, you can go to InstaMojo and you can register for Advanced Python Programming Internship Program. Advanced Python, this is the coupon code. Once you register for the internship, you will be getting access to the PPTs, the recorded videos, the project files, how the projects are being developed. You will be gaining more practical knowledge. Once you attend this masterclass for 25 days, you will be getting a free webinar certificate, and the internship users, they will be getting an internship certificate as well as a participation certificate. Alright, if you are interested, you can go to InstaMojo and you can register for Advanced Python Programming Internship Program. Advanced Python, this is the coupon code. Once you register for the internship, you will be getting access to the PPTs, the recorded videos, the project files, how the projects are being developed. You will be gaining more practical knowledge. Once you attend this masterclass for 25 days, you will be receiving a free webinar certificate, and the internship users, they will be receiving an internship certificate as well as a participation certificate. So if you are interested, you can register for 2-month internship program. on advanced Python programming and Python full stack. So the internship cost comes around 999. Once you are going to enroll in this program, so you will be learning how to integrate whatever prediction we are doing. We can integrate with Django framework. So end to end, you will be getting knowledge of how to develop a full stack Python website. So if you are interested, you can go to InstaMojo and you can register for 2-month internship program on advanced Python programming and Python full stack. The internship cost comes around rupees 999. Alright. So far I just gave an introduction to classes and objects. So next I am going to discuss with you about class inheritance. Till this part, whatever I am speaking, everything is clear. A class syntax. So yes, I will just explain about class syntax. So whenever I want to create any new class, I have to use the class keyword followed by the name of the class. It is terminated with the colon operator, and then I am initializing the student count equal to 0. So whenever I want to initialize the student count, so student count equal to 0. And whenever I want to define any user-defined function, I am just using the def keyword and I am initializing. So what is the name and the age of the student? And I am trying to increment the student count by 1. Student dot student count plus equal to 1. And I am defining a user-defined function called display count. So it is going to display me the student count. Clear with this? So this is the corresponding syntax for creating a class called student class. What is your query, Durga? I didn't get your query. Self is nothing but, so whenever I am trying to create an instance of this class, so self denotes, so I am trying to create an instance of this class, I am just initializing. So self dot name. So whenever I want to initialize the student class, self denotes I am inside this class. So I am just initializing this self dot name. So whenever I am calling the student class, it denotes. So I have to use this self keyword. So I am trying to instantiate the class student. So that is the meaning of this self keyword. Class members, yes. Self keyword, so whenever I want to, you can see here, so whenever I am trying to call the student class Sam and 30, it understands that it is an instance of this class, that is the data member. So that is the meaning of this self keyword. So whenever I want to access this class member, so I have to use this self keyword. Clear with this? So next I am going to discuss with you about class inheritance. So what do you mean by class inheritance? So whenever the child class, it inherits the properties of the parent class, this concept is called as inheritance concept. For example, I have a parent class. So whenever the child class, it inherits the properties of the parent class, this concept is called as the inheritance concept. Clear with this? So what do you mean by inheritance? So this is one more important concept in Python. So I am creating, you can consider any website development. For example, you are developing a website for a e-commerce industry. So I have a parent class. So whenever, for example, the purchase amount, so whichever child class you are inheriting, it can use the data members and the functions of the parent class. So whenever I want to create any new class, class. So parent attribute equal to 100, and then I'm initializing. So def initialize self, it denotes the parent class. So I'm calling the parent constructor. So whenever I want to define any method, so I have to use the def keyword. Yesterday I was discussing with you about user defined functions. So there are two different types of functions available in Python. One is called as a predefined function and one more is called as a user defined function. So def keyword, I am calling the parent method self. So self and then attribute. I will just show you a simple example of this inheritance concept. You will understand this better. So I am typing the code inside the code cell. And then I am clicking the run button. 1 minute, let me just illustrate. So I need to give the proper syntax, only then my code will work properly. So whenever I want to define any new class, I have to use the class keyword followed by the name of the class. So I am just creating a class called parent class, and inside this I am just initializing parent attribute equal to 100. So whenever I want to define any user defined function, so I am using the def keyword, I am just using the init method. So self denotes the parent class. I am calling the parent constructor. And then I am defining a method called parent method. So self, this is given as a parameter or argument to this parent method. I am calling the parent method. And parent dot parent attribute equal to attribute. So I am just accessing, so placing this attribute inside this parent attribute. So set attribute and then get attribute. So you can see here, so the getters and setters, whenever I want to set the attribute value, so it goes to set attribute method, and whenever I want to get the attribute, it goes to the get attribute method. So I was discussing with you about different predefined methods. So what is the use of this set attribute method and what is the use of this get attribute method? Whenever I want to create any child class, so I am using the class keyword followed by the name of the class. So parent class, this is given as a parameter to my child class. I am defining, I am just initializing the self is given as a parameter to this init method. I am calling the child class constructor. So self denotes the current class. So whenever I am creating a child class, self denotes the child class object. So whenever I want to call the child class, I am instantiating. What do you mean by initializing? So I am calling initializing a constructor. So what do you mean by constructor? So whenever I want to create some objects of the child class, I have to call this init constructor. So self denote the instance of a child class. So C equal to child, I am trying to create an instance of this child class. So using this child class instance, using dot operator, I am calling this child method. So what do you mean by this inheritance concept? So class parent, this is called as a base class or a parent class or root class, whatever you call. And all these are called as child classes. So whichever classes that are inheriting the properties of the parent class, they are called as the child classes or derived classes, subclasses, whatever you call. So I So using this, I am initializing this child class. I am calling the child method and parent method. So using again, I am calling the parent's attribute. Whenever I am setting the attribute, I am setting the parent attribute and getting the attribute of the parent. Clear with the inheritance concept? So this is one important concept. So whenever I am going to discuss with you about OOPS concept, so all these are the important concept. So where you can use this inheritance? So you can imagine any scenario. For example, I am considering a website for a bank. So I have a parent class. It contains, for example, what is the withdrawal amount, deposit amount, and what is the rate of interest. So if I want to calculate, so I am defining a general method called rate of interest. So whichever child class, I can create many instances of the class type, object type, parent class type. So whichever child class it is inheriting the properties of the parent class, so it can access the corresponding data members in the methods of the parent class. This concept is called as the inheritance concept. So what do you mean by inheriting something? Clear with this? So this is one important concept. So you can imagine any practical scenario. So whenever I am creating some template, so I want to use some common functionalities anywhere. So I am defining a class called car class. So what are the attributes of a car? And for example, I can drive a car, I can brake, I can stop a car. So what are the different things? I can park a car. So whichever instances, for example, car 1, car 2. So I am going to inherit. So I can use the data members and the attributes and the methods of the parent class. Clear with this? So this is one more important OOPS concept, inheriting something. So firstly, I am just instantiating this child class C equal to child of. I am using this child class instance C dot child method. So I am just calling the child method and the parent method. Again, I am calling the set attribute and get attribute. So all these are the different predefined methods. So what do you mean by a predefined method and what do you mean by a user defined method? So we have some inbuilt methods available in Python language. So I can go for all these predefined methods or user defined methods. Clear with this? So inheritance, this is one more important OOPS concept. What do you mean by inheritance and what do you mean by classes and objects? So next I am going to discuss with you about overriding methods. So what do you mean by overriding? So what do you mean by overloading and what do you mean by overriding? So whenever the child class and the parent class, so they have the same method prototype but different method implementation. This concept is called as overriding concept. So the parent class methods can be overridden in the child class. So what do you mean by overriding? So you should understand the term. What do you mean by overriding? So I am going to provide some different functionality for the methods present inside the parent class. Clear with this? So what do you mean by overloading and what do you mean by overriding? So I am having a student class, I am having a class called aeroplane. So I am defining a method called fly method. So I am having normal flying method and jets, they are flying at high speed. So I am having the same method prototype but different method implementation, overriding something. Clear with this? So you can consider any practical scenario. So what is the use of all these types of concepts? So when I am developing some bigger applications, you can imagine. So when we are going to enroll in Python full stack, so you can imagine when I am going to combine with this. So what are the different things we can perform? So if I want to override, if I want to provide some different functionality to the methods present in the parent class, I can go for this overriding concept. With this, I am just stopping today. If you have any doubts, you can just ask me. today's topics, whatever I discussed. If you are interested, you can go to InstaMojo and you can register for Advanced Python Programming Internship Program. Advanced Python, this is the coupon code. Once you register for the internship, you will be getting access to the PPTs, the recorded videos, the project files, how the projects are being developed. You will be gaining more practical knowledge. Once you attend this masterclass for 25 days, you will be receiving a free webinar certificate, and the internship users, they will be receiving an internship certificate as well as a participation certificate. Alright. So if you are interested, you can enroll in 2-month internship program on Advanced Python Programming and Python Full Stack. The internship cost comes around 999 rupees. Once you are going to enroll in this program, so you will be learning how to integrate whatever predictive things we are doing, how to integrate with the Django framework, and how to develop a full stack website using Python. So you will be learning the front end pages, how it is being developed using HTML, and different Django concepts. So it is a framework, what is the use of model view template, and how to integrate, connect Python with the database. And you will be learning some applications of Python. Any more doubts? I hope I am clear with my topics. Any doubts? So overriding this, whenever the child class methods and the parent class methods, they have the same method prototype but different method implementation. It is called as method overriding. Whereas overloading, so I am going to provide some excess functionality to the same method. It is called as overloading concept. Any more doubts? So if you have any doubts, whatever topics I can cover, I will cover. If I have time in the middle, I will just try to cover all those topics, dictionaries, tuples and lists. Yes, I will give some assignment questions. I have some questions. Actually, I forgot. 1 minute. I have some questions. these questions. Yes, I have posted these questions in the chat box. Any more doubts? Self gamers, it denotes the parent class. Self denotes an instance of the class. So whenever I want to instantiate, so if I'm not using the self keyword, it doesn't know. For example, I'm instantiating the student class and for example student name and age. So whenever I want to denote the current class, so it self denotes I'm trying to instantiate this parent class. Any more doubts? Regular expressions, so I was not able to cover today. So I just covered some concepts. Whichever I can cover, I will just try to cover regular expressions. So in the middle, if I have some time, I will just try to wrap it up. So what is your doubt, Anil Kumar? What is your doubt, Abhiram Reddy? Alright then, remaining things we will see tomorrow, same time, same link. Thank you all.